Okay, I'm live now on the Fondbites School of Sugar Art Facebook page and then on the Instagram. And this live is the first from the series Cakes Unplugged with Subhashini Ramsingh, which I just announced like a few days back only, right? And I just wanted to start off this month itself because I thought Halloween is right. It's very close on the 31st of October. I thought all of us should just gear up and be a part of making a cake, a pumpkin cake, and we'll all post it together on the 31st of October. Okay, so you should also learn how to make that. So I thought, I said it's the first Monday of every month we'll do. From November, we'll do it on first Monday of every month. But now, because it announced in the first week of October, so now we're on the second Monday of 4 p.m. But we still have time to learn how to carve a cake into the shape of a pumpkin. And let's do that, okay? Now, during the process, if you have doubts, I'm just looking at another device there to check if there are any comments and queries. If you have doubts, I look into, but let me just focus because I have the sponge itself in me. I'm going to start with layering the cake and then carving. I have done quite a bit of practice to not use up a lot of time sitting here, maybe 5-6 hours. We don't have so much time. We try and finish as quickly as possible. So any doubts, maybe I look into some time in between if I have to rest the cake, or then let me just go on with the process. Now, here I have the turntable, and that's an anti-slip mat I have put on top of the turntable, and that's an MDF board. It's a cake board, and then I'm putting that because now the cake board will just not move if I have to just move around. So this is set, and the next thing that I have is this mud cake, which I've made like a couple of days back. Mud cakes you can make ahead and then store it in the freezer. It's nicely cling wrapped. I'll be using like one of this whole sponge and half of this. To begin with, I'm going to start cutting off the crust from the mud cake. After which, then I'm going to cut each of them into two. And then I have dark chocolate ganache made in the ratio 1:2.5. I wanted it to be quite firm. You can also use 1:2 dark chocolate. If you're going to use milk, then 1:3. The 1:2 in the dark chocolate, 2 times of chocolate and 1 times cream. Okay, so like every other time, if you know me, how I store the cakes and all that, I remove the cling wrap only after all the condensation has happened on the outside of the cling wrap, and cling wraps are done in 2 layers. Okay, so first one I've removed because you don't want the condensation to happen on the sponge itself. That moisture will be absorbed by the sponge and it is just going to change the texture of the sponge, which you don't want to have. See, that's a beautiful mud cake that you can see. Mud cakes are dense, but then they are the best for carving. I'm going to share the recipe after the live is over. Okay, so crust is normal. I'm just going to use serrated knife to go around. I have a butter paper lined, so it is easier for me to just catch upon the crumbs as I am going to chop through. I keep turning. I like it this way instead of just putting in the knife from one end, from the right side to the left. I keep turning in as I put little pressure at a time and move the knife in, so I'll have a leveled top. Okay, so this I'm just going to put it in another bowl, which I will use it up later for maybe making cake pops or cakesicles. I'm just going to remove this. And now this layer, I don't want to use it as it is because then you have people to cut and eat. You don't want too thick a layer of the sponge without the filling. It's quite cold. So I'm following the same process. I'm just using the knife around until my knife marks meat, after which put pressure going around. It will be a little difficult if your sponge is quite firm, but then that is better instead of having a lot of cake crumbs and a very soft cake. It is hard only because the sponge is cold and firm. And now once I reach, I have 2 layers. Okay, now I will have to do the same thing for the other sponge as well, but I'm just going to use one of the layer, not the two, because otherwise I really don't want a very tall pumpkin. Okay, so I'm just going to remove this. So preparing the layer is the first step. I don't want to do that and keep and then make it look like, part of it is already done. And then maybe if you are doing the whole carving first time, I wanted you guys to see how it just all starts from the sponge that's baked and cling wrapped. So, you will not have surprises when you're actually doing. And if there are surprises, then I would have it too. And if you guys are watching it, then you will feel a little more confident. Okay, here again, you can see the crust is formed. I'm just going to keep it. Let me just put the sponge on the cake board. So it's easier for me to keep turning the butter paper. So as I keep turning, the knife will meet the middle. I'm going to put this aside. Okay, now this again, I'm going to cut it into. And once the knife marks meet, then I'm going to put little pressure and allow the serrated knife to go in. Keep turning so I know my cake layers will be leveled. I don't want a slanting layer. At least here it's just all going to be carved. The shape is fine if there's a little bit of slant, but in ideal cases, if you're going to tote the cake for having leveled sponges, then that's an ideal way to do. So one of this, I'm going to use it. Okay, so 3 sponges are here with me. What I'm going to do, quickly just give a clean. Okay, so now I'm putting this turntable in the middle. Okay, and now here, now I'm going to start with a ganache. Like I said, let me just put the ganache right next to the turntable so you can keep seeing how I'm using up the ganache. Like I said, it's a 1:2.5. Also because I have to quickly show you this whole thing and I don't have a lot of time to set it in the fridge and then take it out and all that. But if you are going to use up 1:2, I mean, you feel like the 1:2.5 is quite firm, it's not going to keep your cake layers quite soft, then doesn't matter. As and when cake is getting soft, then you will have to put it in the fridge, firm it up, and then use. Now, on the cake board, I'm adding a little bit of the ganache, after which I'm going to place the first layer of the sponge. Okay, and now I'm going to layer at the ganache and layer it. So add quite as much you think will be needed for the filling. You can use your offset spatula or your silicone spatula, whichever is convenient to. Just drop the ganache on the cake. Don't start with just a little bit of ganache. That's going to catch up on a lot of crumbs. Now go around with the spatula. Put pressure so your spatula will not catch up crumbs back. Okay, so one layer is done. Now I'm going to add the next layer of the sponge. I'm just trying to make sure if the cake is all leveled. Then the next layer of the ganache. And it's a mud cake, so I prefer not to use sugar syrup. The cake is quite moist by itself. Okay, so added enough ganache on that layer and then go around with good amount of pressure using the spatula. Spread it out, trying not to lift up the spatula, and that is going to get away with the crumbs of that cake layer. Okay, so one more layer should be good, after which I will start to carve. This is quite good. Now once I carve, it is going to get the shape. Now adding this another layer after the layer of the sponge is just going to leave me with a really tall pumpkin, which I don't want to do. Now on the sides, I'm not going to do the crumb coat. What will happen, it is going to while carving, I will have to end up wasting a lot of ganache. So we can start with carving right away. So the dark ganache work is done. I'm just trying to smooth out, just fill in. At this stage, if your cake sounds too soft, then it has to go into the fridge. So every time you have difficulty in carving, you feel like the cake is giving out a lot of crumbs, then you have to firm it up in the fridge. I'm just going to put the layer of the sponge aside. I will not be needing that anymore. Okay, now I'm just going to start using the knife. Yeah, I'll also be needing the bowl because I'm just going to start having chunks of the cake layers that I will have to put it back into the bowl. You can transfer this into the butter paper and just get me an empty bowl. Okay, so on the top that you can see, I am just going to make the sections of where I want to carve and how much of the size of each of the wedge of the pumpkin is going to be. So I'm just going to start with the top. So assume that this is the center. Okay, and from there I'm just first going to mark my lines. What is the wedge that I'm looking at having? It doesn't have to be even. It is okay if you are trying to make it even, doesn't matter, and that's why we have started with pumpkin. It's just an idea of how to help you carve. So the wedges, now make extra marking so the wedges on the top are pretty clear. Now just start using the knife at an angle from one side and then turn the knife to the other side and remove off that excess So you create some depth, remove off that cake. So every time you carve, you will have that you have to remove from the main cake. So now this depth is what will define the of the pumpkin. So the first part is to hold your knife towards one side, cut, go in, and then towards another side, and remove that excess out of the cake. Okay, so the first stage will be that. Mark your wedge, just score it with the knife. That is the first step. Then as the second step, use the knife on one side at an angle and then on the other side at the opposite angle, and remove the excess and put it in the bowl. So that is just making that scoring, the wedges, the marking of the wedges, you're just making that point deeper. Okay, so now you can see the wedges are marked deep enough, and now I'm just going to start with the sides. Now from here you can just start scoring down, right exactly down that you can see. I'm just going to go and score it in just in two places, so you have enough that you can remove off and create a deep impression there. We will continue all the sharp points, we will continue to remove. Okay, so you can just use your fingers to just soften up and just make sure you are able to see that knife marking that you've done. So this is the first part, and now I'm just going to do the same thing to the entire, all the wedge markings. I'm just going to cut in through like a cake slice, remove off the excess, and just use my fingers, and then just make sure I am able to see through the wedge that is cut. Going ahead, I am going to continue doing the same to we will be adding ganache to soften up. So how much ever you are able to remove, I mean, you're not going to overdo. Removing of the cake, you don't have to overdo. But then even if you overdid, you can add back the cake, the bits of the cake, or you can also use ganache. Going in and then cutting out extra and putting it back in the bowl, and that you won't need it on the pumpkin shaped cake. So those are the extra cakes that you have to remove out. It's better to have a clean knife. I'm going to get a bowl of hot water, and I'm just going to dip in the knife. So the knife is clean every time, otherwise the stickiness from the cake and the ganache is just going to make it difficult for me to remove off the excess from the knife itself. Okay, as you can see, half of the cake is carved down. Now I'm just going to follow the wedge and then come down, and like how you would cut out the excess from cake, like the slice, like however you would just go on and slice, but then this is like a really thin slice of the cake. cutting out extras. Okay, so it's kind of done all around now, right? Now what you can see is the wedges cut, but you can see how sharp the edges are. But pumpkin has like really soft edges, right? Now on the carving part, what we will be doing is to soften up all the sharp edges. Okay, now see, now you can see this is a sharp edge that has to be softened up. This is another sharp edge that has to be softened. And this is also an edge I need to soften, and I also need to soften up here. So the entire part wherever you see is all sharp, and I am just going to soften that up. Soften means to cut and then make sure the sharp edges of the cake I'm just going to remove. And so this part, the sharp edges, cut it out and remove. Now why I use mud cake is when you're going to use knife and cut, you can have like really thin slice of the cake come out. So as you carve, you can just go little by little, and carving makes, though this mud cake makes carving really very easy. If you're using a butter cake, then maybe if your butter cake is not really very promising, which means if it doesn't cut thin layers like this, and if it is crumbly, then your carving experience is not really great. Okay, now this part is softened up. You can see how different this looks to what we have here, right? This is kind of quite soft. Now I could go around and do that to a set of edges. Soften the sharp edge because we don't want sharp edge on a pumpkin. So I have the hot water in a bowl. So what I would like to do with this hot water is the knife into the hot water. So the excess chocolate or the ganache will just get cleaned up, and also the knife will heat up. So my chopping gets pretty much easier. So you can see it's quite hot. And now every time it is better to get into that bowl of hot water and then put the knife onto the cake. Now here, wherever you can see the depth of the wedge is just gone because you have softened the, I'm just putting the water aside. You know, every time I'm just going on to my right side, you know, there is that hot water bowl. Now wherever I have just removed this edge of each of the wedge, I am just creating that depth again. And you can see now every time getting into the water and then cutting just gives me such a clean piece of the mud cake. And this is quite nice and aids me, like makes it very, very convenient for me to carve a cake. Okay, so that part is done. You can see this part is softened up, and onto this wedge, I have softened this edge also, right? That I will continue to do to the other wedges also, which is softening it up here and then on this side. So I'm completely finding all the sharp edges. You can see how different is this wedge and this wedge. This sharp edge cannot remain on a pumpkin's wedge, and that I'm just going to go ahead and soften it up. Softening means using your knife and then removing off the sharp edged cake that still remains, because you want all of it to be smooth. smooth surface is what I am calling it as softening. So everywhere, just put keen eyes and then watch on your cake and go around and remove all the sharp edge, because you want a very smooth wedge for a pumpkin. So softening on this edge is all done, and now I am just going to soften this part out. And there, because you have layers of the cake, it may not come out quite easily because there's ganache that's there sandwiched in between. I'm just going to increase the gap also, but then my aim is to soften up this part. So now you can see this part is quite straight, right? And that I'm just going to have a smooth and curved surface. That's another way that you can rightly say for the word that I'm using, soften up. Smoother surface. Here you can see it's quite smooth, right? And but here you can see it is quite straight. So this straight part of the wedge, I am trying to smooth out. Okay, so I'm going to also dip the knife once in a while and go around. So the first part, just remove off that sharp part of the wedge which you just cut and created for each. That will increase the gap and it will also soften up. We will be adding extra ganache. So this is that sharp part which I am removing. So carving is like you will not be able to get it, like you think of a shape and then you cannot get it like in the next half an hour or so. It will take time. I wanted to do this live especially because to show you it is a lengthy process, but then once you start doing it, you will be enjoying it. And that I wanted everybody to experience as part of this first Cakes Unplugged series. Okay, so the sides are quite done. I'm also just going to use my fingers to soften up. After the gap is created, I'm just going to touch with just little pressure. If you think you hands, if you can also use hands with your clean hands, quite fine, doesn't matter. I just wanted to keep it pretty clean, and I cannot be going in and washing my hands as I work, so I'm just wearing a gloves. It is definitely fine to work with clean hands. When you are doing that, if your hands are sticking and it is not letting you to touch and then soften, then you need to dip your fingers in warm water and then continue touching the cake with little pressure to soften up and give it the shape. Touching little water in your fingers, and with the wet finger itself, go ahead and then soften up the edge. Okay, so the next part, now this wedge part is done. I'm just going to remove, clean up the table a bit. also the board and the turntable a bit. So you could just look into the cake without having to see the bits of cakes as a distraction while you're watching. Okay, so now you can see the softened sides. Now the next thing is the top of the um, pumpkin is quite lowered. It is not the same height as the extreme sides. For that, I'm just going to go ahead and reduce the height, for which I just need to start from the outside, leaving a little bit of the space here. Start from the outside and then go deep in into each wedge. So I'm going to hold the knife at an angle. I'm not going to hold it straight like that. Hold it at an angle. Now the wedge starts from the outside. It comes all the way till here. Hold it at an angle like that and then go in deep and then remove the wedge. Now you can see this is going deeper, and that is what you want. Now do that to every wedge the exact same way. Hold the knife at an angle, go in deep, and the center of the cake, the top of the pumpkin, the height of it is lower than the side. So this part is lower in height than the outside. Now if I feel the knife is quite sticky and if there is resistance in the knife as I'm cutting, I will dip it in the hot water as I do. Now how much deep do I want? That you can decide, because pumpkins are in the natural form, there are different shapes to it. Even the wedges are not as deep, but then because if you are beginning to carve for the first time, you would be tempted to go deeper with the wedges. Doesn't matter, because you are learning to carve and it is fine. Just understand how to soften each of the wedge. Now I'm again going to go in and increase the depth of the wedge, because now on top of this I will be adding the ganache, and I want the cuts and the grooves a little more deeper. So the ganache will fill up a little bit, and I should create more room with my cuts and my carving and the grooves. So if it softens up a bit while I'm adding the ganache, then I will not lose out on a lot of shape. Now the top is quite done. Now next thing, as you can see, as this is reduced, now the bottom also has to reduce, and it is quite standing flat on the board. And now what we need is a U shape on each of the wedge. Now that will not sink your cake down, because the center part is quite flat and it is lying on the cake board. Now each of the wedge, I am going to go ahead, hold the knife at an angle, cut it through, remove this out. Now onto the same wedge, holding at the right opposite angle, cut it through and remove this off. And now the bottom, cut it through. Now if by chance it has come out with sharp cuts, soften it up with your fingers. Now this will create an illusion that that part of the wedge is hanging, but then on the inside you can be pretty sure that the cake is quite supported and that wedge will not sink down. You will also be adding ganache, right? So you also need to create room for ganache. So you can go a little deeper and remove the excess, because you need room for ganache that you will be adding on the outside. Now I'm just going to turn it towards me to check if that shape is quite fine. Yeah. Now I will continue. I'm just dipping the knife in the water. I'm just going to continue doing that, creating this illusion, this level of this height that the wedge is lifted up, and that I will be creating by cutting this side, one from this angle, the other from this angle, after which I will just join the two, and then I will make this wedge lifted up, looking like it is lifted up. That extra will have to be cut. Remove off that part, and then the bottom. Excess goes out into the bowl, which you will be using it up for later other purposes. Now use the finger, make sure the ganache that you have applied in between the layers is just coming in handy for you to stick the layers together. Let me go ahead and continue doing this. For the rest of the wedges. So this small bits of the cake as I carve comes out like a clean slice, and that happens with mud cake only. So every time if I have to have a carved cake, I just bake mud cakes only. Like you can see, sometimes not really not like all the butter cakes are bad, but then butter cakes are a bit crumbly. As you can see how this slice is like quite stable, just that little slice I'm just able to cut in and then get the slice out, which I can put it away, and the rest of the cake I know is going to be quite stable and doesn't crumble out. So let me first cut out like one on the left side, one on the right side, and then at the bottom. And that way I know. And then later on, let me just go and soften up. So I can quickly do as I'm just keeping you guys waiting. Because all the more I just wanted to do it in live and not a pre-recorded video where you wouldn't know the exact time taken, or maybe if you could compare it, or if you're just doing something wrong, or if anything wrong happens like when I am doing it, so you wouldn't be surprised when you were doing it for yourself. You can just be pretty sure that while carving mistakes could happen, and you will know how to fix it. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this around, and I'm just dipping my fingers into the hot water. You could do with your bare fingers as well, works as much. And I'm just softening up the bottom and making sure the ganache in the layers. Now my hands with the gloves are sticking back. Now if I find the gloves comes back with a thin layer of the ganache sticking into the gloves, then I will have to dip that fingers into hot water. Okay, so the bottom is done. I'm just going to go around and see if I need a little more carving. So some places here I see maybe I can soften up this part. You can see this part is quite nice and softened up, but here you can see it is a bit uneven. And like pumpkin, you can leave it uneven, doesn't matter. But if you have to do some other carving part, like you want to make this even, I just want to show you how to do that. I'm dipping the knife in hot water, and go ahead and then cut off that uneven surface here. I'm just making it even to the layer that is below. Okay, this also you can see there is a little bit of uneven part there. Which I'll just go and smooth out a little bit more. You see this dent, you can fill it up. So every time you see a surface that is uneven like this, not all the time you have to keep carving because you really need that bulk there. But then if you feel that there is a dent, then what you can do is just use a little bit of the chopped cake itself and then just put it in and level it up. And if it doesn't stick, mud cakes are moist, so it sticks by itself. Maybe if it doesn't stick, if you're using some other cake doesn't stick, a little bit of ganache on that gap, and then add bits of cake and make sure it's not too crumbly. If it is too crumbly, then what you can still use, you can mix up that crumbled cake in ganache, make it like how you would do for a cake pop. Just mix it up and make a dough kind of a thing with a mix of the cake crumbs and the ganache, and after which you can use that to seal the dents that applies to any kind of carving. Okay, so every time you carve, if you are too close to your own cake and you try to find out if you've done whatever you've done is good or whatever improvement it needs, if you're too close to your cake, you wouldn't be able to judge. You have to just step back and then roll it, get to the eye level and check the underside and see if everything is quite fine. And if something else could be better, now you need to use your judgment to see, as I'm looking, what I'm seeing, are there any sharp edges that needs to be softened up? I see quite some places which I'm going to point out and then show you. My underside, is it fine? My underside quite fine, except I would have allowed a little smoothness on the bottom. Now the top, as I see, here are the sharp parts which I'm just going to slowly soften up. I don't want it sharp. Like you can see how different this one is and this part is. Smooth out. Just chop off the cake gently, layer by layer. Now don't be tempted to use that knife and then just chuck it out and then remove a bigger chunk. Even if you did that, it is okay, but then always remove 2 mm of layer at a time, where you're not sure whatever you're doing is enough or not, the carving is enough or not, are you overdoing. Even if you overdid, doesn't matter, you can just add in a mix of chopped cake crumbs and the ganache or buttercream, mix it together and add it back in that excess place that you've created. Like you cut off excess, you can add in the cake pop mixture, which is the cake crumbs and the ganache or buttercream mixed up. Now all of the sharp parts I'm smoothing out one more time. Now at this stage, let me also just remove a little bit more from the middle. And are my sides enough? I mean, sometimes I already have another version of this in the fridge because I thought maybe if it is not setting and if I'm not able to kind of get on, or if it's getting too long when I am going to cover it with the white ganache, I already have another one that's made and in the fridge. And when I made that, I was very specific that, let me not make it very even, all the wedges. The first one I did, well, it was quite even, and then I specifically tried to make it a bit uneven. So you can just be okay with even uneven wedges. And so I'm just checking. You can see this part is quite smooth, where you can see this is a sharp part, which I don't quite like much. So I'm just going to cut this out. So I'm putting my eyes to keenly look at sharp parts of the wedge and soften it up. Also, it is okay to have this not very deep or even quite deep, that doesn't matter, because you have pumpkins in all different variations. Now I am going to go at the eye level, which I have to do, and check if the inside of this shape on the bottom, if it is quite clean and good. I'm just going to remove off the excess and clean up, because I have to be adding the ganache. Okay, so now the next step, I have to crumb coat this. Now I if given some more time, then maybe I would go on and then maybe sculpt it, give it a little more shape. Maybe I'll take another 20 more minutes to get it to the shape that I would like it, like say the 100%. Now I would say I like it like 80%, but to not put in so much time, because as far as teaching is concerned, I have told you every step of what is very important. So the first thing was to mark the wedge on the top, and then go on a bit left and the right, and then increase the depth of each of the wedge on the top. And from there, I'd use the knife on the sides, going in deep left and right like a cake slice. Remove that out, so the sides of the wedge, the demarcation of each of the wedge is done. After which, what I do, soften up on the top, left, right, and then on this part is where I started softening up completely, and the sharp edge of the cake is taken down from here. Then again, I had gone and done this deep through, holding the knife at an angle, cutting it down through and getting the center deeper than the outer sides, right? After which, what I did was to cut the bottom, which is cutting at an angle on one side, opposite angle, and then the bottom. So 3 sides are cut, and then you have a U on each of the wedge at the bottom. So creating an illusion that the wedge are lifted up, but then the cake at the bottom inside is holding the whole pumpkin in the chocolate cake form, and then you have the shape. After which, I had to just roll it around and create the extra wedge shape. After making the center deeper, go ahead and create the wedge, like use the knife on the left and right of each of the wedge, make it deeper. And so on the top also, I can see the demarcation really well. And after which, what I do, used my fingers, dipped in hot water and softened up each of them. And my eyes, if I have to look into for more perfection, what I have to keep looking, what I have to find on this cake to better my carving is find where it is sharp. The sharp knife cut, or the cake by itself is sharp. Use the knife to slowly smoothen layer by layer and remove the sharp parts of the knife cut or even the cake itself. Now smoothen out the entire part, the top, the sides, and then the bottom. All of it has to be smooth. After which, if the cake, I'm like working right opposite to the AC, so the cake is quite firm and good. And then now this will be good to crumb coat. Now what I have to crumb coat is white ganache. The cake crumbs part is over. Now white ganache, because I could have done a dark ganache coating and then used a fondant to cover. So I have quite a good amount of room for creative painting and all that. But to keep it simple, because it is going to go on a live, white ganache and then color it to the color of the pumpkin. Like you can look for real pumpkins and see what color you would like to do. But I'm going to do orange. There are quite a few different kinds of pumpkin. Now I would put this in the fridge until I get the white ganache. I have made the white ganache like the day before yesterday in 1:3 ratio. Let me just give it away to go into the fridge while I get the white ganache. I have it right here. Okay, so this is quite firm to the touch, also because there is AC here, and this is a 1:3 ratio. Now when you're making white ganache, it has to be made ahead of time, after which before you are going to use ganache, you need to beat the ganache. So I have my handheld electric beater. You need to do that. I don't want to make this ahead of time and keep, because I thought you guys have to see what happens to the white ganache itself as I'm working on live. Now this I need to whip up. Clean bowl. Let me start beating this. Now, if you are in a hot room, a temperature that is not quite cold, because I said like I am in the AC, so this is quite good. If you are not, then you wouldn't have consistency like this. It could be runny. If it is runny, what you have to do is put this in the fridge for 15 minutes or so. Let me just wipe the bowl. There's that little bit of dark ganache. You have to refrigerate the bowl with the white ganache for say maybe 15 minutes burst, after which it will be ready to get beaten up. Now if you do that, then the consistency has to be like this. If it is flowy, if it is liquid, then pop it in the fridge 15 minutes. Now I'm adding, I just want to start off with light orange, and then I would like to go a little darker shade on the outside. So just the 2 drops, and then I'm going to beat. Okay, so the beating is done. I'm sure the ganache just went inside the fridge, but that doesn't matter. I can still work on it. I'll just get the cake from the fridge. Now, if this ganache to be too stiff for me, I can also microwave. Now, as you can see, like I said, it is right in front of the AC. I want to soften this up. And now if this stiff ganache is going to remove off a lot of crumbs as I bake, this is the same thing that has gone inside. Now if this ganache I feel is a little stiffer, so depending on whether you are in a very hot place, like the ganache will be like too flowy, or if you're in a cold place where the ganache will set. Now what this consistency of the ganache will do, will not allow me to apply on the cake. It's going to catch up a lot of crumbs and then come along with a spatula. Now I want to use a small palette knife, which is an angled spatula, and that's the number 3 from the set of 10, set of 5 palette knife. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of this white ganache to see if this consistency works for me. What I'm going to do, just go on on the top and see how much of the crumbs am I picking at the back of the spatula. Now, if that I am picking a lot, and then if the ganache wouldn't stick to the cake, but then come off with a spatula, which means my ganache has to be soft a little bit. So I will just pop it in the microwave for it will be easier, the process will be faster as I'm showing it live also. I don't want to be eating up a lot of time as I go ahead, because you can see there are crumbs that I'm catching up with the spatula, right? Which means the ganache is stiffer for this state of the cake. It is quite firm, as you can see, but I'd like my ganache to soften up a bit. Now I'm just going to remove the crumbs out of the bowl. I'm going to pop this in the microwave for maybe 10 seconds should do. Okay, so let me just read through the comments. My cake leaves a lot of crumbs. Can you please claim a dive? See, if your cake is not cold from the freezer, like when I started off, Shivani on Facebook, Shivani Mantri, no doubt. If the cake is not from the freezer, if it is not firm and cold, then it will have a lot of crumbs. So this cake I had taken out like 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes out of the freezer before the live started. So it has to be firm. Okay, then Binita Bakes on Instagram. And which chocolate you have used for white ganache? I have used vanilla compound to make the ganache. Okay, so I have the ganache that's microwaved. Now you can see it's a bit softer than what it was, so applying will be easier. Now I'll go ahead and then try using this. If I feel like this is even stiffer than what I would need, then what I'll do, I will microwave it again for 10-second burst. Now let me, I have all the time at the end to clean up the finish. Now the first jobs I am collecting crumbs. That doesn't matter because crumb coat is essential and it will pick up crumbs. You only have to aim to seal the cake. Now the finishing you can do with hot water, and we are going to use our fingers for all the uneven shapes on the cake. You can either use OHV sheet okay, or use your fingers. I think I will soften up the ganache for maybe 10 or 15-second burst. I like it. So you can see as I am just using the spatula, and if the ganache wouldn't stick on the cake, and then it will just peel away and have the cakes back into my spatula, which means the ganache should be softened up, which means it will go into the microwave. You don't have microwave, double boil, just get it a little more smoother. Okay, so in the meantime, what I can show you, I have a bowl. I've just discarded the bowl with the hot water with ganache, and this is a cleaner water and a cleaner bowl. So what will happen to all these textures? Now the temperature in the bowl should be, you have to be able to bear that hot water, right? And it's quite fine. So use your fingers, dip it into warm water and go ahead and smooth it, so that your warm fingers is going to help soften up the surface of the ganache. And you can also leave textures back, because pumpkin surface can have textures, doesn't matter. I have the ganache with me, but let me just dab the warm fingers back on the ganache that was applied, so you can also see how the surface of the ganache softens up as I am working. So I'll come back to smoothening the surface of the ganache. Now let me get back to also the spatula that I am using. I can warm that up into the hot water in the bowl and use that into the bowl of ganache. And that warmth from the spatula will again help soften the ganache a bit, right? Now this feel is quite good. Now this consistency I feel is quite good for me to go ahead and apply a thin layer, and this is not catching up crumbs back into the spatula, and by that I can be sure the layer of the ganache is not very thick. It will be quite thin, and that's what I want because I'm just the crumbs. Now this is one way. The other way is to pick the ganache into your fingers. That way it is faster and I can be sure that I can go into all the grooves and fill up with ganache. Now I'm just going to start on with that method so I can also be faster. Now I'm just going to dip my fingers into the warm or hot water. I can't feel it quite much because of the gloves, and then the water is quite soft. So I'm picking up some ganache and then I'm going to apply it. Now to understand if the consistency of the ganache is quite good, you can go ahead, use the spatula. And once you know that this consistency of the ganache is not going to catch up the cake crumbs back into your fingers or the back of the spatula, then microwave like I did in 10-second bursts. I had done twice. It also, like I said, depends on the room temperature that I'm in. Now, because I am using my fingers, I can just go into the grooves. Also, because I am working right in front of the AC, the ganache would stiffen up, which is fine. I can still go ahead and microwave again, just in 10-second burst. Now you can see using hands is a bit faster than the spatula. So if you ever had a doubt if you can do that for an uneven shape, it is quite fine to use your hands, but then make sure your hands are properly cleaned before you're using your hands to touch on the cake. I'm just going to go inside the grooves, like you say here, where when I used the spatula, it was a little difficult for me to go quite in. And now wherever I'm just seeing the gap, I will just cover up the cake with the ganache. And now the sides are done. Now I'm just going to do the top. And now if I feel my hands now is full of ganache, I'll just go put it in the warm or hot water, and obviously the temperature you should be able to bear. Okay, after which now this is going to make it easier for me to apply because the ganache is not going to stick back into your hands, but then it is going to move around freely. Now if you feel like maybe if it is getting sticky, then just dampen your fingers and make it a bit wet, but also in warm water, so the consistency of the ganache will just soften up as you do. And now the entire thing is covered. The next thing, I just want to first figure out any gaps that are there and seal it. I'll just leave this in the fridge until I'm just going to make that stock of the pumpkin also I just wanted to make. While this can go into the freezer, it wouldn't take 10 minutes to get the stock done. And then I will apply a final coat, and that I want to do it in a bit of darker shade of orange, so it look like it's highlighted. Now, is there excess ganache? Now that I want to check. If there's excess ganache, you don't want to leave that on the cake. Just go ahead, because you created the grooves, right? And that is the shape of the pumpkin. Now you just want to let that groove be as much deeper as possible, so you are not going to lose out on the carved out details that you have made on the pumpkin. I'm just dipping my finger in the water is already turned warm now. There's no more hot water, but it doesn't matter. It is just helping me smooth out the surface and close out any open cake areas that I can see. Now, at the bottom, we did create and make a U shape and just got the level of the pumpkin. Look, it is raised up, right? There, the ganache is not applied yet. It is an open area. The cake is exposed there, and that part, the ganache has to go in, otherwise it is going to be open and dry. Now, as you're using your fingers, if you are going to smooth out, and then if you feel like the ganache is catching up on your fingers, then you need to dip your finger in warm water and dab the surface and make sure all the additional textures, I mean the textures are good because it is pumpkin, but then I would like to cover up the cake wherever the cake is seen. Now I'm just going to go to my eye level and see at the bottom. I'd like the bottom of the pumpkin to be covered with ganache, white ganache. Okay, but then I'd also like this to firm up a bit, so I'm going to put this into the freezer, clear this up, start with the stock, and we'll get this back again and then cover the sides, add another layer of little bit of darker orange ganache, and I think we will come to the end after that stage. Now I'm just going to clear up, allow this to go into the freezer until I get back. I will be needing warm water, but maybe I will just use a fresher one. Let me just remove the gloves because I'm just going to work on fondant. Cleaning up the table. Okay, so now I will just get that tray which I have the things. I'll just brief up what I'd used. So all the things I need for making the stock. Now what I have, that's petal dust to just I'm reading through the question. What is the ratio for white ganache? 1:3. 1:3 ratio means 1 part of chocolate. Say if you are using 100 grams of white chocolate, then 300 grams of cream. What I've used is Amul Blue Pack Dairy Cream, 25% fat. You can use up to 35% fat as well. Reading through. More questions, if any. Can we use Colab couverture chocolate to do the ganache? See, if you are comfortable with certain kind of ganache, stick to that. But if you are a beginner, then use compound to start with learning to car, and then move on to using coverture, because learning to do something using compound is much better. Ma'am, is there some specific recipe for this mud cake? Yes, I am going to share the mud cake recipe after the live is over. Can this live be saved? Yes, you can save. I will be sharing it on Instagram, IGTV, and also on the Facebook. It will remain. You can watch it anytime. Can we use Colab? Is the mud cake recipe shared? Mud cake recipe I'm going to share. You can use that, or you could also use your own recipe. Ma'am, can you tell me more about the storage of the white ganache used here? You made it ahead, right? Yes, I made it ahead 2 days back, like 1:1 ratio, which means 100 grams of chocolate. Vanilla white compound is what I use. To blue Amul cream, which is 25% fat. That was 300 grams. So 100 grams to 300 grams, 100 grams of chocolate, 300 grams of cream is what you need. Melt the both together, cling wrap the surface and leave it in the room temperature. You can also go into the fridge and take it out ahead of time, an hour or two ahead of time, and 3 parts of chocolate to 1 part of cream. I think the ratio is more chocolate to less cream. 300 grams of chocolate to 100 grams of cream, right? That is the ratio. I mean, do not get confused on the ratio. 300 grams of chocolate to 100 grams of cream, not the other way. Okay. So let me just read through the comments at the end, because we'll also have to complete the entire thing. Now, this is fondant, brown fondant. On the white fondant, I'm not using gum paste because this did quite stay when I tried, and I'd used brown gel on the white fondant. I'm just going to knead up a bit, and I have a skewer that I want to use it, that will get poked into the cake. Make it soft. Anytime you use fondant or gum paste, make it soft. Even if you have just kneaded in the color, just before you are ready to shape it, you have to soften by kneading it. Okay. Now, do I need the entire thing? Maybe not. I'll just be making a smaller stock. So what I don't need, I will have to wrap it up and keep, and not keep it open. So now this is the ball of fondant, and first begin with pressing it down between my fingers and making a ball which doesn't have a lot of crease to start with, for which I just need to put pressure, like press it down as I make the ball. Okay, and then I'm just going to hold my fingers like a bit open and use one side of the hand to make a sausage. I mean, this is a teardrop shape, like one bottom part is quite wide, and then the other end becomes narrow. Okay, now I will just flatten this bottom part up because I want this to go sit on the cake, right? So flatten that up, and I will just need a little bit of glue. Glue is a mix of water and CMC, and then I have the skewer. Now what I will do, dip the skewer into the glue, because you want the inside of the skewer to stick onto the stock, the fondant stock. Now the glue is applied quite well. Now I'm just going to insert this as much, not to the entire height of this. I don't want to just insert it till here, because I just want to turn this part and then give some shape. So until like this height, I have inserted the skewer. Now there is glue coming out. I don't want to leave this part open because it could come out, the skewer could come out. So I want to pinch the bottom. That excess glue you could wipe off, and also to dry the part out where the glue is there and then sticky, then I'm just going to touch a little bit of the corn flour and pinch this part. This you could do to any figurine where you are using a skewer or a wire at the bottom because you want it to stay on the cake quite nice. Now use this and soften up wherever you've pinched. Okay, and this is done. Corn flour part is done. And now what I'm going to do is just giving it shape. And I just want to also create some textures. Bottom, flattening it out because that will sit on the cake. And now I'm using the Dresden tool and going to just create some random lines, not too straight. Just go ahead, and even if the shape changes, it's okay. Just come all the way till the tip. I also have a craft knife with me. After the Dresden tool, then I will just go ahead and use the craft knife and create more texture onto the stock. You could make it in green color. You could also stick with pumpkin in green, but yeah, orange is quite good. I will stop with creating the texture and then covering it with ganache. With another additional step I will do with using a darker orange. But if you are going to make it for the Halloween, then you could look for Halloween pumpkin cake inspirations, and maybe you can just create an eye or make a lantern shape. And you can also uh, maybe add succulents to it, or you can just add your own variations. So I'm just using the craft knife as well. I'm just cutting it through. So go ahead one more time using the Dresden tool. What you actually need is an uneven surface. So it looks like quite rugged and not smooth on the outside. Okay, now I'm just going to twist it a few times and just make the tip a bit more pointy. And this, while placing it on the cake, we could create more shape as well. Now this should be allowed to dry. Now I also want to dust this, for which I have the petal dusts. I need aluminium foil or the butter paper or a cling wrap. Okay, so I'm just going to have a layer of cling wrap. I prefer having an aluminium foil. I don't want the dust to be going around. Okay, so I'm just going to place this out here. And what is chocolate. Okay, and just taking a little bit of the dust. If you're looking at having a lighter shade, just mix this up with white petal dust if you have, or just mix in corn flour. Just leaving a few places in lighter shade so you can have that little bit of realistic look. And then on the bottom, Okay, so now this part I'm going to allow it to dry, and I hope the cake in the freezer, not sure how long it took. Now it should be quite firm for me to continue. So this is the stock. I can just add in a little more shape when I'm just going to add it on to the cake. Now I will just leave it on this tray and get it once the cake's layer is done. Now I will leave this tray aside. What I will do, what I will do, I have the same ganache. I just divided into two bowls, one for the lighter orange and then for the darker orange. So for this, I may be adding a little bit more color. That's the same blade. That's okay because the same ganache. A little bit of the extra color. Just a little bit of additional color. Let me see if I'm happy with the color, or maybe I'll add a little bit more. Okay, so this is color that's darker than the version I made before. So I will have to again microwave this time 10-second burst 2 times. So I already have it in the consistency that I'd like. 10-second burst for 2 bursts. Okay. Now I have the cake, the same cake that just went into the freezer. It's quite firm now. I also have clean water, hot water, and now let me just pick up my gloves. So I can just don't want to use my bare fingers touching the ganache. Now if I have the access to wash my hands as frequently as possible, I don't have to do this. Okay, now I can see it's quite firm now, and the ganache has gone into the microwave, the darker version. I'm just going to use the spatula to check if this is the right consistency. It's quite good. Now I'm just going to again pick the ganache using my fingers because that is easier and faster. Now as I'm going to add extra details using the darker shade, I'm also going to go in, now that the cake on the underside is quite firm, now I will be able to pick the ganache, go into the bottom. That's pretty much easier to cover that part of the cake I said on the bottom is quite exposed. So first thing, let me just fix the bottom of each wedge. That extra ganache on the cake board can be cleaned. Now the focus will be on the bottom wedge. You could do that with the same orange shade, and also because it just got over when I just finished on the previous stage, it is also okay to add that one extra color because it is also in the bottom, and I am just going to use the same darker orange shade to create some streaks, and that extra additional color, the darker version of the orange, will create some drama. Okay, let me just check if I've done that to all the wedges. Yes, it's done, and the bottom is all covered up. Now I will go ahead and pick up some ganache and just create just a bit of streaks in the middle. First, let me just see. I mean, there are no hard and fast rules of you have to add this darker shade of ganache just in the middle of each wedge, or maybe you could also just go ahead and then add the darker version only on the the dents, and that will give the shadow effect, which is also good. But you can also focus on covering up wherever that ganache, the dark chocolate, is seen. But try not to make this darker orange is the only color that you will see at the end, because that is why we are creating two shades, right? You want that lighter orange also to be seen in certain places, so you can create the darker orange and light orange, adds some drama and depth to the pumpkin. So I think to all the wedges, this color, the darker orange, is added and looks good. Let me also just go into the wedges also. I like the color going inside the wedges, and some uneven surface of the ganache also. Let me just go ahead and cover it up. Uneven surfaces is what now I will just pay attention to. And then again on the top. Now let me just create a single streak on the top and just bring it to the middle. Okay, now the next step will be to smoothen up. And say maybe if your fingers are not going into the grooves, you could use a brush dipped in hot water, and you can just use it like, let me show that part as well. You can pick up a brush and dip that into the hot water and pick up ganache using that brush, and see if there are places where your fingers wouldn't reach, then use the brush. And say maybe if you do not want to use your fingers at all, it is not bad, but then maybe personally if you do not prefer, then go ahead, pick up the brush itself for the entire step that I used the hands to do. But then it is a bit time consuming. Like you see, you have to be grabbing a little by little in the brush and then go on to seal up all the small places, and that is just an idea, but that is time consuming. Now the next stage, I have added the ganache all over. Now what I can do is to remove the excess ganache that dropped on the board. You just want a cleaner look, and so you can look into the pumpkin that's carved and without distraction. Like you have too much of unnecessary stuffs around, then you will be distracted and you wouldn't be able to focus on what you want to. So you to make more corrections, you want all the excess from the cake board to be removed. So cleaning the board in between is important, so you can have an undistracted vision of what you're trying to complete. I'm just checking from the inside if there is any extra bits. Okay, now the next thing is to completely smooth out. For that, I'll use my fingers and dip it into hot water and just smooth out. So every time I feel like my fingers are sticking, water is the only way out. You feel like if the cake is getting exposed because you removed off a lot of ganache, then you can add more ganache with your fingers again, or a brush, or even a spatula should. Now putting that into the freezer for that 10 minutes was essential. That is just helped to firm up the whole thing, and it is allowing me to smooth out. But otherwise, if the cake was quite soft right in the room temperature, then it wouldn't be as easy as it is now for me to go on use the warm and wet fingers to just soften up. Now you could go on, put that time and smooth out the entire surface. I would maybe, if I had the time and if the live was not going on, I would spend another 30 minutes to an hour more to get to the finish that I would like, which is, this is the only thing that I'll be doing. There is nothing else extra or new that I'll be doing. I will just use my fingers, dipping it into the hot water and smooth out all the rough ganache surface on the outside. Now it'll be better at certain places if I sit and see on the underside. You have to do that. Sit and work, and then if you are not comfortable and if you have strain on your elbows, because I am standing and doing, I am not finding any strain on my elbow, which is like continuously from the start till here. I feel comfortable, there is no strain. But then if I had to sit and do the entire thing, then maybe my elbows will have trouble. But then you cannot be standing all the time because you want to see on the underside if you have done quite well. I think now I'll stop with this. If I had to continue, then what I would have done is to cover this up, which will be something like this: picking up ganache, dipping into hot water and smoothen out. But I do quite like the brown surface. Now by using my wet fingers and warm, it is just softening up the surface. Okay, so I think that will be it, and I will just place the stock on top and then look into the comments. Now let me just clear this up also. Again, let me see if the board is clean. Cleaning up so you have a better visual and you're not distracted by the excess ganache or the water drops on the turntable. So you can clear this up. Okay, so all the cake crumbs, everything is done. Now, the last thing I need is the wire cutter. Okay, so now you could use the, it's the same thing, it's now quite taken some shape. right? But allowing it to dry for a little more time is not a bad idea, right? Now it is, except that the glue is going to take some time. The shape is quite fine. Now, can I do this in toothpick? No, because I want the height of this excess stick or the skewer that's popping out to be the height of this level in the middle. So the weight of this stock that is made in fondant is not going to squish. Obviously, it is not going to squish the mud cake, but then if you are making this cake in some other sponge, then the weight is going to sink it through. So I am just going to visually try and chop some part of the, oops, okay. So let me just check if this height is enough. Is it going to go through? I still need to chop off a little bit more. So that way you can eyeball. So it is fine. So start with keeping some excess. Now, is it going to go through till that middle and go in? I will need to chop off some more. Now, is it going to go in fully? It would go. Okay, so now I'm just going to drop this in, and if it is dried out, you can just poke it through in. Now that I'm not sure if it is dried much, I don't want the skewer to be popping out of the stock. Now let me just shape it in whichever way I think it is done. So I think we've come to the end of finishing the pumpkin carved cake. More details would be better, like I could maybe have 2 eyes and then the mouth and make it look like it is suitable for Halloween. All that you guys will do. It is just a basic technique of carving a cake by layering it without having to work with a lot of molds, different cake pans. You don't go hunting for pumpkin cake pans because you have to work for Halloween. So acquiring a skill is very important, and that is why I wanted to show and teach carving. Also, if you have ever feared and thought carving is not my thing and I'm just really scared to think about carving, then you have to break that fear out and start doing it now, because you can see it can be uneven. It cannot have sharp edges, and look for sharp edges and smoothen that out, and you're going to have pumpkin right like how I started with wedges, and all the wedges are smoothened out, and it's quite easy to work with your hands, warm fingers in wet and hot water, dip it in and use your ganache to go over. I would maybe love to have some brown streaks of the ganache and more colors added to this. Okay, so now this is the end of the session. Now I am just going to go in, read through the comments. Thanks for the session. Can you please tell what's the weight of the cake sponge? Weight? No, I didn't weigh this because I was more concerned about the shape of the pumpkin. I should go ahead and weigh this so I'll know how much it took for the ganache on the filling and then the white ganache on the outside. And mud cakes are pretty heavy, and it is not going to weigh the same that you would think a butter sponge of the same size would weigh. Mud cakes are heavier than the oil sponge and the butter sponge. What color brand it is? What I had used is AmeriColor gel. Please show your brushes. Which brand? Brushes are pretty simple. I haven't upgraded my brushes. They are very simple from any stationery shop. There is not even any brand written on it. These are just for rugged use, like I just wanted it firm. They're quite firm, and you wanted to use for ganache, and you have different brushes for different purposes. What I've used is, maybe you could go on for a flat synthetic brush from any stationery shop. I'm reading more comments. I'm looking at somewhere else, but yeah, I should be looking at you and talking, but I'm reading the comments on another device and then replying to your queries. If you have missed the video, you can go back and start watching from the beginning. It will be available on the IGTV How long will the cake stay outside? See, cake, because mud cake, you can even keep that on the outside in AC. I mean, not all the time in AC, like few hours in AC and then few hours in room temperature, doesn't matter. 2 days also is fine. But then this part is not going to take more longer than a day. So one whole day you can leave it in room temperature, which is like AC has to be there, carve, and then you're good to go. At the end of the day, put it in the fridge. It'll be a first carved cake. I'm looking forward to seeing your cake, Mona. And I'm just juggling between the comments in the Facebook and Instagram. Please share an eggless mud cake recipe. I will. But what I have used is with the eggs, but I will share an eggless mud cake. But then if you're quite happy with your butter cake, eggless butter cake, and if you know you can carve it quite easily, then stick to that. That doesn't matter at all. You can still go ahead with your own favorite butter cake recipe. What's the diameter and the height of the cake? Diameter is 7 inches. And the height of one sponge, I think, would be 2 inches tall. I had 2 such sponges. I used only one sponge fully, and the other sponge I had used half on the top to get the shape. I don't want to have a very tall pumpkin. I don't have petal dust, so should I use brown fondant? You can use brown fondant. You can use cocoa powder in place of a brown petal dust to do this dusting. Cocoa powder works as much like a petal dust for this purpose. Can we dip brush in ganache? Wet brush in ganache. Yes, you put the brush into hot water and drip off the excess water. Don't wipe it. Then use the same brush to pick up ganache and use that to directly go onto the brush to keep painting. And ma'am, is this video saved? As I missed the carving part. Yes, it is saved on Instagram. You can find it in the IGTV. I'm going to share it in the IGTV. Can you please finish off this cake to your expectation, record it and post it? I have another version which is already, I thought I will have to use that, but then I had quickly finished it. I will do that. I will dust it, make it colorful, and then I will post a version of this. Maybe either I will cut it and show it to you guys in the live itself, but I will save it and then I will post it later. Can we make pumpkin with ganache only, or we have to use whipped cream too? You don't have to use whipped cream. Like as I said, if you are learning to carve for the first time, stick with ganache for filling the layers, and use white ganache. That is pretty much easier. If you're first time going to carve, do the exact thing like I did. Only add add-ons on the outside. Maybe you can use fondant cut out for the eyes and the mouth and all that to make it look like a Halloween. Can you please tell us about the color gel? It is a Mary color gel based food color. I have, the different colors because I know I'll be using a lot. So I had got this from the US. I'm not sure if a Mary color is available here, but that doesn't matter. You can use any gel color that is available in India. It works quite the same. Bhumika, thank you for the amazing session. Thank you so much also for watching. Ma'am, 1 part chocolate. No, that was wrong. I think I was a little gazy in the middle of all the carving and all that. 3 parts chocolate. What I've used is vanillin white compound. 3 parts, which is 300 grams of white compound to 1 part of cream, Amul Blue, 25% fat. Is there some specific recipe for this mud cake which we can carve? Yes, as I said, this recipe is my favorite, and I'm going to share that recipe with you after the live by the end of today. This cake looks quite crumbly. Does it have a dry mouthfeel? It is not crumbly. It is quite moist. The crumbly texture is on the outside because I'm leaving it unfinished as I want to answer the queries and not eat up too much time on the live. You should watch the place where I had sliced and carved that part. You can see the thin slices coming out and it is quite beautiful to carve. How to store finished cake? Yes, you can keep it in the fridge. You can put it in a cake box and then keep it in fridge, and then it stores quite good. A couple of days you can just keep it in the fridge. How to avoid oil removal from the whole chocolate ganache, ma'am? If you find that oil is just coming out of the ganache, then add warm cream, room temperature cream, a tablespoon at a time, and then use your wire whisk and then mix it, or you can also use a handheld beater and then whip until the oil just disappears and the ganache comes together. Please do share an eggless mud cake recipe too. Okay. Now I'm looking at the comment that says my eyes are beautiful. So I just tried to skip that comment. But then my team is all very happy about that comment and they want to highlight that and show. So thank you, whoever said that comment, accepting compliment with thanks. Okay, and can't wait to make it. Okay, so now I think comments and doubts are quite clear because hopefully I made this a little more elaborate. I want to talk about the Cakes Unplugged with Subhashini Ramsingh. That is a new initiative I started. It is like I'm going to come live and teach a technique to you on the beginning of the month, and I'm giving you time for the entire month for you to try, but then don't take long. Start up as soon as you feel like you are still in that fire of having learned something new. You have to make the same thing, or you could add in your own improvisations. We are all going to connect together on the Cakes Unplugged with Subhashini Ramsingh Facebook group. If you're not added in yourself yet, go in and join the group, and then you will be accepted. And then once you get into the group, you can ask your questions regarding this cake. And if you're stuck on half the way, maybe you could take some pictures or maybe videos of where you're stuck, post it on the Facebook group. Then I'm going to go through that and guide you if you are stuck with maybe anything, any of the steps that didn't work out quite well. After you've done with the entire thing, decorate it like Halloween, because we are preparing for the Halloween collab. This entire series will end every month with a collab where all of you will be posting on your social media on the last day of the month. This month has luckily become the Halloween day, so we are going to celebrate Halloween end of month, October 31st. Everybody are going to post a carved pumpkin cake. So in the meantime, we are going to be connected on the Facebook group. As you make, once you complete, I will be giving you my honest review of where you could have improved or where you could have done better. And that will complete one whole month of the series. Every month I'm going to come live and show you a technique, and that whole month you can take the time to work on that technique. And that way, through the year, imagine you would have learned a lot of cake decorating techniques that will upskill you into the world of cake decorating. Now, to further encourage you to do better with each cake, we are going to have 3 winners every month. There is going to be a gold, a silver, and a bronze. Every month, I am going to choose the best entries. Number 1, number 2, number 3 will be gold, silver, and bronze respectively. And all the 3 winners will receive a digital badge, an e-badge that you can share it on your social media, that will have your name and the position, which is gold, silver, or bronze. And then a digital certificate will be emailed to you, which will also hold the position of your place, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze. And then I also always feel like holding a physical thing in your hand, that nothing can beat that. So a fridge magnet will also be sent to you, which will say your winning position, gold, silver, or bronze, will be couriered to you, shipped to your physical address, which you can hold it in your hands and then feel really good about having practiced a technique, learned something new, and then you've participated in the collab. And I have chosen you as the best of the entries for the entire month who have participated. And this will be for that month. We have 3 winners. And through the year, I'm going to do this for 12 months in a row. And through this entire year, whoever has participated, you don't have to be a gold, silver, or a bronze. You just should have participated on all the 12 months, and then you will be invited here to the Fondbites Studio to work with me one day, and then we are going to learn cakes together, like what you are interested. We're just going to agree upon something that you would like me to make and show to you, or we are going to learn something new together. But you will be invited here to the Fondbites Studio to spend a day with me. All 12 months, if you're going to do, then at the end of next year, by the same month, you can come in to visit me at the Fondbites Studio. So this is all about the series that I wanted to talk. So please participate and let's see who wins the gold, silver, and bronze. Now going back to reading the comments, do we have to do more coat of ganache after this step? You can do that like I explained. You can add some more ganache and clean this up and get it to a bit more softer on the outside. Such an awesome motivation will be helpful for beginners. Let me thank you. Thank you so much, and that's what I am meaning to do. So don't fear carving. Just start up, and then you will have your beautiful pumpkin with you. Any more comments? I think that's it. More doubts, like if you're watching it till the end of this, because they are going to be recorded and shared on the IGTV, and the Facebook will also have the video there. Once you watch and you feel like you have a doubt, there is time to do this only till the month end, because the next month we will be moving ahead with another technique. If you have doubts, post it on the Cakes Unplugged with Subhashini Ramsingh Facebook group, and I will be there to answer your queries. So until then, see you guys, and see you next month. First Monday of November, I'll be there to work on a different technique, and then you have the entire month to learn another new technique. Until then, signing off. Bye.